Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christopher Van Dop, CET, and I'm your president-elect. We are going to be waiting a few more minutes. We have some 600 persons who signed up for this webinar, so we'll give them a chance to sign up. I'm happy to see that we have over 250 participants already, but we'll wait a couple more minutes before we start. We're up to 290 participants, and I guess I'll get started when we're closer to 300. Okay, there we go. Um, Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christopher Van Dop, CET, and I am the president-elect of OSET. I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar on the future of electrification in Ontario and the implications for engineering technology provincially and ultimately nationally. I'm pleased to advise that today's webinar has been approved for CPD credit towards OSET members' mandatory requirements. This webinar is serving two purposes. The concept was originally developed as part of the OSET Board of Directors initiatives to provide OSET members with information on emerging technologies to assist them in the preparation and performance of their work. In fact, emerging technologies has now been identified as a strategic priority in OSET's new 3-year strategic plan that will take effect as of January 1, 2025. This webinar was scheduled during this week so that it could be part of National Engineering and Applied Science Technology, or NEAT Week, which is an initiative of the Technology Professionals Canada, and just one of many activities taking place all this week on both a national and provincial level, with the intention of highlighting the valuable contribution that certified engineering and applied science technicians and technologists make to the engineering community and to our provincial and national economies. Yesterday was the National Capstone Competition webinar, where technicians and technologists from all over Canada voted on the best capstone project. I'm proud to announce that the winning team of the first National Capstone Competition are Vikram Pandey and Hugh Roy Staples of Sheridan College. Their capstone project is hydrothermal carbonization, HTC, of plastic waste. Congratulations to Vikram and Hugh Roy. There is another free webinar tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on the role of AI in shaping the future of engineering, insights, tools, and practical tips. A link has been added in the chat if you are interested in more information and to register. Today's webinar will be recorded and a link will be available to the recording on the OSET website. Before we begin, I would like you to join me in acknowledging that this land has been a site of human activity for thousands of years. We honor and respect the diverse Indigenous peoples connected to the territories from which each of us is joining the meeting today. We recognize the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on this land and express our gratitude for the opportunity to live, work, and gather here. We are committed to understanding and acknowledging the histories, culture, and contributions of Indigenous peoples, and we strive to build positive and respectful relationships. As we engage in our discussions and activities today, let us carry forward this acknowledgement and commit to working towards reconciliation, understanding, and collaboration with the Indigenous communities in Ontario and Canada, and to continue the stewardship of the land we all call home. Let's get today's webinar underway. It is my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Kathy Lorette. Kathy served as Senior Vice President, Business Transformation at Electra Utilities, the largest municipally owned electric utility in Canada. She also served as VP Utility Operations for Horizon Utilities, overseeing all aspects of engineering, construction and maintenance, and supply chain management divisions. She retired in October 2021, concluding a 40-year career in the energy sector, and is now a consultant, assisting companies with merger integration, operational improvement initiatives, and diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. She is the Vice Chair of the Board of Governors at Mohawk College and Chair of the Energy and Power Innovation Center Advisory Board, Mohawk College. She recently joined the board of Innova Power Corporation and continues to coach and mentor young professionals and supports programs that promote diversity in the energy sector and skilled trades. Kathy holds her CET certification and was conferred the Fellow OSET designation in 2019. Kathy, we're looking forward to your presentation this afternoon. We'll have a bit of time for questions at the end of Kathy's presentation. We encourage you to enter them at any time in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Kathy.
Thank you, Christopher, and welcome everybody. It looks like we've got a great crowd online today. So for those of you who are not familiar with or perhaps did not participate in the survey that OSET launched in September, I just wanted to give a little bit of background. So OSET had identified that the projected massive increase in the need for electricity in Ontario may have the potential to impact significantly on OSET members. So I was contracted to do some research on the projected need, develop a survey, so we could gather insight from OSET members who work in utilities across the province. So today we're going to roll out the results of the survey. Next slide, please, Julia. So our agenda today, firstly, I'll provide some background on what the massive increase for electricity looks like and the timing. We're going to roll out the survey results and also ask some additional polling questions so we can gather some of your personal insights and share some final thoughts from the survey. And hopefully, if we have time, we're going to open it up for questions. If we do not have time to answer all the questions, we will respond to the questions after the webinar. So I want to just say thank you to all those people who did respond. I was very impressed with the thoughtfulness and the robust responses in the survey. It took me a long time to go through them, but it was great to see. So we hope to gather further insights from you today. And then I'll wrap it all up, wrap this work up, and communicate all of our findings in an article for OSET's magazine, The Ontario Technologist. Next slide, please. So the Ontario government is planning on building the electricity infrastructure for a decarbonized electricity system in Ontario by 2050. And you can see on the screen, there's some reports from the province of Ontario and the IESO that kind of outline these plans. So the government worked very closely with the Independent Electricity System Operator, or the IESO, to forecast demand of a decarbonized supply mix by 2050. They were also asked to evaluate a moratorium on any new natural gas generation by 2035 and generally inform the government of opportunities and challenges with these scenarios. So the government also created blue ribbon panels. They created the Electrification and Energy Transition Panel. They also made recommendations back to the government. The Electricity Distribution Association commissioned a report which is more detailed on the potential impacts at the distribution level. So there's lots of reports and analysis on this long-term view of the government. And they're all available online if you ever want to read them. So next slide, please. So the government's highlighted three main drivers for demand growth, at least in the next decade. So economic growth is going to be mainly from EV battery and component manufacturing and green steel investments. Electrification of light duty and public transportation systems is forecasted to grow at an average annual growth rate of 17%. And many of these impacts will be felt at the distribution level. And population growth is expected to grow by almost 15%, or 2 million people by the end of this decade. And there are some significant challenges with this plan. So the IESO has forecast that the bulk electricity demand could more than double by 2050, but it's at a cost of $400 billion. And that's just the bulk electricity system. And these investments can take 10 to 15 years to build, so they're very problematic as far as timing goes. So they're really going to need to focus on innovation, policy certainty, and regulatory streamlining, not to mention the uncertainty around the available land, Indigenous partnerships, and a massive threefold increase in the labor force to build bulk power system assets. So how Ontario's future supply mix evolves is going to depend on future research, some analysis, consumer preferences, and ultimately policy and investment decisions according to the IESO. So the 88,000 megawatts and supply mix diagram on the screen is not the final. It'll just evolve over time. They don't know what it's going to look like by 2050. This is just a snapshot as of today. So the impact at the distribution level, which is really not addressed in the IESO report, is that capital additions may need to double by the mid-2040s and increase by 130% from current levels by 2050. And most of the drivers for increased demand in the next decade will be felt significantly at the distribution level. Local distribution companies will be challenged to expand the system to accommodate this growth, modernize the grid to maintain reliability and affordability, and enable customers' choice. If you work in the sector, I'm sure you've heard all about the 3Ds: digitization, decentralization, decarbonization. They're all on the radar, and those are the things that the utilities are working at right now. Next slide, please. So let's move on to the survey and start talking about what you told us as far as the survey goes. So the first question was, is the pace of electrification realistic for LDCs to plan, finance, and build the infrastructure required to meet the government's timelines? 32 of you responded yes, and 68% responded no. So overwhelming, it was no. But let's go to the next slide and we'll look at some themes and insights. So is the pace realistic? So on the no side, timelines and forecasts seem unrealistic to many people who completed the survey. They don't necessarily think that forecasts are very realistic, so I think they're not believing what they're seeing. Overwhelming through a lot of the survey, we heard that this is just going to be cost prohibitive for customers. We have limited resources now to complete the work, and scaling up work at this magnitude is going to be an issue, finding people to actually do the work. Supply chain management issues, we heard a lot about, we're still seeing supply chain issues from the pandemic, and now we've got to ramp up for this greater need. So they think that is going to be a problem. On the aging infrastructure, we heard lots of comments about utilities not being able to keep up with aging infrastructure and maintenance on their systems, let alone adding significant capital. And the pace is not clear. The government's lined up, this is what it's going to look like by 2050, but there's not a lot of interim steps to help people understand what it looks like along the way. Regulatory roadblocks is another issue that has come up time and time across this survey. The regulatory roadblocks are an issue now for utilities requesting funds to upgrade systems, so they think it will only get worse. And on the yes side, comments about utilities forecast 25 plus years now, so they should have a good line of sight on this. We should be okay. And also, this has been on the radar for years, so they should be ramping up. EV adoption has slowed. There's a lot of disbelief that EV adoption is going to take hold and that they don't think everyone's going to have an electric vehicle eventually. And grid capacity has lots of room. Everything's been overbuilt for years, and they think capacity is not an issue in the short term. And generation upgrades are on track, so that's also a very positive message. Okay, next slide, please. So moving on to question 3. So how can LDCs create partnerships to assist with the rising pace of infrastructure investment and the new technologies needed to manage a two-way power grid? So all levels of government need to be working together. They've all got to have the same view of what's going to happen by 2050 or whatever the date is, and not contradict each other. OEB investment models are outdated and need to address funding for new green technologies that don't necessarily have a great return on investment, but are really needed for a decarbonized system. Leading tech companies, they're normally farther ahead than utilities, so great idea to partner with leading tech firms. Work with other LDCs for better planning and standardization, especially utilities that border each other. There's some synergies there for sure. We should look to partner with private equity firms to fund some of these the capital budgets that are going to be pretty extreme in the future. And of course, we need to partner with suppliers and contractors to get the material and actually get the work done, because we won't have the internal workforces to do this. Large customers are a key player in the whole decarbonization scheme, because they are big emitters. So we need to bring them on board so they can make some changes and work along with us. And of course, First Nations and local communities are going to be impacted by new builds, new equipment going in. So they need to be part of the partnership. And lastly, home builders. The discussion needs to be had with them about building more sustainable homes to get us where we need to be. So there's opportunities to gain both expertise and synergies from all kinds of partners. And this was the most of the theme that we heard through this question. Next slide, please. So question 4, in addition to partnerships, how do you see industry sectors coming together as the pace of electrification advances? So interesting to see that over 30% of the respondents say industry sectors are not coming together. But on the flip side, most say that they are seeing partnerships and third-party support. LDCs actively collaborate through working groups, conferences. The EDA, for example, has a lot of working groups. So there is some collaboration with LDCs. Of course, there's still mergers and acquisitions. on the radar, which brings people together and consolidates standards and things like that. And third party support, a lot of people mentioned, the Utility Standard Forum, Grid Smart City, and the Electricity Distributors Association are all good groups that help bring people together. Of course, equipment manufacturers need to come on board. We need to start standardizing the equipment that we're buying. I'm not sure personally if that's ever going to happen, but I think it's a good goal to strive for. Also, green and sustainability investors. We can't invest and pay for all this on the customer's back, so we need to have some investors. And I think we're already seeing partnerships with transportations through LRT projects that are happening across the province. So lots of opportunities there. So let's kind of shift gears for a minute. Just go back one slide, please. Let's just back to question 4 slide. Yeah, there you go. So let's poll the audience, and we want to get some of your personal views on electric vehicles. Maybe you can run the poll. So interesting. So the first question is, do you currently own or lease an EV or hybrid vehicle? Okay, so pretty overwhelming no. Okay. Okay, great. So let's end the poll and let's pull up the next question. Okay, so most of you do not own or lease an EV or hybrid vehicle. So the next question, do you intend to purchase or lease an EV within the next 3 years? Still, the majority is no. Okay, I think we can end the poll. Okay, so the majority is no. And let's go to the third question on EVs. Do you think there are sufficient EV chargers in Ontario? Well, this answer doesn't surprise me a bit. Okay, overwhelming no. Okay, so we can end the poll. Great, thank you. And we'll go back to the presentation. Okay, so just some interesting stats on electric vehicles I wanted to share with you. I wanted to ask these questions because throughout the survey, there was a great disbelief that this whole push for EVs was not ever going to happen. So, but today, there are more than 118,000 electric vehicles or plug-in hydro vehicles registered in Ontario. And by 2030, there are expected to be more than 1 million EVs. Electricity demand from transportation is forecast to grow at an average growth rate of 17%. So they do foresee an increase in that for sure. And there are more than 2,900 public charging stations with over 8,000 charging ports. And 80% of those are level 2 chargers. So I think from what I've heard, that people don't think there are enough chargers, but I think realistically, it may be that the chargers are not in the right place. And that is the driving force behind people adopting to electric vehicles. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. And get rid of that poll question off my screen. There we go. So let's go back to the survey. Question 5, have you considered or have you participated in any of the following to acquire new skills or upgrade your skills or credentials? And we ask you to check all that apply. So the top answers were web-based training, work integrated learning, and other was the third choice. And most of the answers in other included involvement with agencies on a global scale, career relocation to other countries, conferences and speaker series, and in-house training. And then over 20% of the respondents have considered returning to college or university. So interesting stats there for sure. So question 6, next slide, please. This was just a yes or no question, no comments, but do you feel that your current skills align with the future technologies that electrification will introduce? So most of you are a yes, which is great. You've got lots of confidence in your skills. But I want to share with you on the next slide some labor market insights. So Electricity Human Resources Canada, or EHRC, as you've heard them referred to, are really the subject matter experts in Canada for everything related to human resources and the energy industry and the labor components of that. And so they do a lot of work gathering labor market insights, and they forecasted the need for 28,000 new electricity sector employees by 2028, which represents 25% of the current workforce. So that's huge. So that's a combination of replacing for retirements and new positions in the organization. An extension of this forecast indicate that an additional 130,000 job openings could materialize between 2028 and 2050. And just so you can see how things are changing, just between 2018 and 2022, the number of job postings containing keywords like renewable energy, solar power, wind generation increased by 56%, and it's still going up. And on the ICT portion, and when I say ICT, that just means information and communications technology, and that's all the cybersecurity, software developers, database administrators, everything kind of IT. So a 364% increase in job postings for ICT occupations in the electricity sector just from 2018 to 2022, and that is huge. So another good source of information is the Conference Board of Canada, and they see a demand for artificial intelligence skills has surged by 37% since 2018. And I imagine that that's going to go up. But interesting enough, we're talking a lot about technology, but employers are really looking for hybrid skills. They want people with technical skills, but they're also looking for soft skills, right? So soft skills like communication, teamwork, time management, conflict resolution, creative thinking, all those soft skills are, becoming very important in the workforce these days. So just keep that in the back of your mind. And there's so many opportunities coming. So don't pass up any opportunities to upgrade your skills or learn something new, because there'll be opportunities to change jobs, move jobs as this electricity system evolves. Next slide, please, Julia. So we asked everybody What skills and or capabilities do you consider to be critical to keep pace with new technologies? Overwhelming answer was artificial intelligence. That was the largest response. Skilled trades and workers on the power distribution side was the next most popular answer. And project management and new technologies was a close third. People thought automation and cybersecurity were also important skills, and critical thinking um, and risk management were the next close. And there was a lot of people talking about being able to solve problems and dealing with change management. So, yes, the world is changing, and we do have to figure out how to manage this big change going forward. Okay, next slide, please, Julie. So question 8, as the grid is modernized and distributed energy resources penetration grows, are you concerned about cybersecurity and customer data protection? Overwhelming, the answer is yes. So as you know, greater connectivity to customers raises cybersecurity risks. There's so many entry points on the grid. We have varied vendors and equipment, which complicates cybersecurity management. We see that threats are becoming more sophisticated and frequent. And people are asking, who is taking care of our personal data? There's a lot of unknown as to who owns and protects our personal data. This cybersecurity issue has been a growing issue for decades. And there's a reliance on foreign solution that raises other security concerns. And just on the no side, for the few people that didn't think it was an issue, the comments were really around there's cybersecurity systems in place and they are improving all the time. So they didn't think the risk was as big as the people who had answered yes. So interesting concepts there for sure. Next slide, please. So moving on to question 10, considering the increased emphasis on the conversion of Ontario's predominantly natural gas heating to electricity and hybrid solutions, what are you hearing within your workplace about these conversion efforts? So over 25% of the respondents have not heard anything. So that's interesting. I think there was quite a few people that had optimism and excitement with a hint of caution whether this is going to happen. Some people said it's not happening quick enough, and happy to know that nuclear is on the radar again. People don't believe the capacity will be there to transfer from gas to electricity. It's going to be too expensive. Customers are not going to be able to afford running everything on electricity. And the government should focus on energy diversity instead of just looking at electricity. We still need natural gas, and we do need it for peak times, of course. And there are few government incentives, so customers are going to be very slow to adopt. So that's what people are hearing in the workplace. So let's take a little change of gears here, and we've got 2 more polling questions for you. So let's go to the last 2 polling questions, please, Julia. Okay, so the first one, considering the increased emphasis on the conversion of Ontario's predominantly natural gas to electricity, what actions are you taking for your home or business? Okay, so it looks like we have some interest, but no plans yet. Few people have done all they can do. 25% of you are not interested in converting to electricity solutions. Okay, interesting. So there is some interest. The majority of the people say there is some interest, but no plans yet. Okay. And 26% of the people are not interested. Okay. Excellent. So let's end the poll and we'll go to the next question. So what would you consider the most important to you when you think about electrification? So just choose one. So is it investment, affordability, reliability or capacity, safe safety, or decarbonization and lowering greenhouse gas emissions? Okay, not surprised that investment and affordability is the number one. It's come across time and time again in the survey. Hmm. Okay, so investment and reliability are the top two answers. Great. Okay, let's end the poll and we'll go back to the presentation. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, please. So question 11 is energy affordability going to dampen customers' desire to meet Ontario's climate goal to achieve net zero emissions by 2050? So again, overwhelming yes. Cost concerns overshadow climate goals. The majority of the time I heard that in the comments over and over and over again. Number one concern is cost, but let's go to the next slide and we'll look at some of the other comments that people had. So again, affordability is a number one concern. Reliability should be on the radar as well. Doing nothing is not a viable solution, that's for sure. And we need to look at alternatives like hydrogen, which the government is looking at, I believe. Customers will need incentives in order to afford conversion of their vehicles and heating systems. There are some incentives now, but I think they're more geared to low income. But I'm sure there's more on the radar to come. As the costs rise, people will turn back to dirty solutions because it's more affordable. But in the end, there was a few people pretty positive about the benefits will outweigh the current frustrations over time. So yeah, cost is going to dampen it for the majority of the people, but there are some people who are very optimistic about it. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So what do you consider the three biggest risks to achieving net zero emissions by 2050? So the most popular answers were higher costs to electricity end users. You see a pattern forming here. Grid capacity constraints, lack of supportive policy and regulatory frameworks to enable investments in grid expansion and capacity. And those are the same messages that are coming from the people who are analyzing the government's documents, same concerns over and over again. And in the other category, it was interesting to say quite a few people had mentioned people's willingness to change was going to be a big risk, right? And again, people don't like change. And so people's willingness to change, they think, is going to be a big risk for this plan. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So on the other side, what do you consider the three biggest opportunities to achieving net zero emissions by 2050? So the three biggest opportunities, according to the OSET members, are improved grid reliability and resilience, decarbonization and reduction of greenhouse gases, and creation of new jobs, which we've already talked about, lots of opportunities for new jobs. Closely followed by enable electrification and integration of DERs. right? So in the other category, interesting comments about nobody is talking about conservation. They need to empower people to make better choices, which is interesting. Um, yeah, we need to get people to make better lifestyle choices aligned to the 2050 net zero goals. And we can't achieve this without compromising living standards. So again, the concern about cost is coming up over and over again. And some people are afraid that people aren't going to be able to afford it at the end of the day. So big risks with the plan. And the ISO is laid out, and other people have laid out these risks and more as part of the government's plan. Okay, next slide, please. So some of the we opened it up at the end just to give some final survey comments, and I thought these were interesting, that there are a lot of options that be considered before we say everyone has to get a fully electric car. So there's still people that do not believe the projections about electric cars. Look at the data behind mining and minerals required. That is a significant issue for electric vehicle batteries, of course. It needs a lot of minerals, and nobody's talking too much about that yet. And again, the need for material for EV costs, better infrastructure are all important for electrification. And again, current LDCs in Ontario can't keep up with the changes that the industry is asking for. The regulatory environment is too restricted, needs to change before 2050 goals are realized. And the time horizon for carbon displacement is not realistic. So this creates the environment for discussion, technology development, investment, alternative energies, and social change to develop. So lots of varying comments, but so impressed that the thought people put into this survey and putting this together was very interesting. It seems the OSET members are generally on the same page about a lot of things, but very interesting comments. So looks like we have some time for questions. So why don't we open that up and see if we can facilitate some questions. I'll see if I can answer them. And again, if we can't get to them all, or I can't answer a question right now off the top of my head, I'm happy to get back to you.
I guess that's my cue to introduce that. Kathy, thank you so much for your informative presentation. It was also very rewarding to see that so much of the information you shared was actually contributed by OSET members who work in utilities and other energy-related organizations. Our CEO, Cheryl Farrow, will assist with moderating the questions. If you have a question for Kathy, please enter it in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, not the chat, as the Q&A box gives us a permanent record of the questions in case we don't have time for all the questions. Kathy is also preparing a summary article for the OT magazine, and where appropriate, she can address any remaining questions in the article. Thank you. Cheryl will now pass on the questions.
Thanks very much, Christopher. And Kathy, my thanks as well for an informative session. And there has actually, I'm not sure, because you've been focusing on presenting, but there has also been a lot of very interesting back and forth and dialogue in the chat with members really sort of exchanging with each other thoughts that came up. But in terms of the formal questions, I'm going into the Q&A section now. And please note that we do only respond to questions where there is a name. If questions are anonymous, we aren't able to bring them forward for answers. Larry McHenry has put in a couple of different questions related to, I'm going to read his first question, and he's got others related to the dams. But the shocking plan by OPG to dam 22 additional northern pristine rivers as part of the electrification ramp up. The impacts to mercury pollution and other dangers should be addressed. And do we know if this has been addressed?
So in my research, I did not read anything about that. The government really just talks quickly about new nuclear and upgrades at Bruce and Darlington. They don't talk about in detail about any dams or other work the OPG is doing. So I'm not aware of that.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. The next question is from Darren Main. I understand that Darlington will be expanded with a new CANDU reactor. Is there a cost efficiency advantage to this type of upgrade?
Well, I think the cost of, well, I'm not an expert in the cost, but there is a cost advantage to nuclear. I mean, that's where we're going. If you look at the price of solar and wind, I mean, they don't operate 100% of the time, and the costs, although they have come down, are still quite expensive. So I think there is a cost efficiency advantage to nuclear, but I'm not an expert at that either.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Zenping or Rick Yu. The recent EV battery has developed into sort of the solid state of batteries and swapping packs. And what about our process for this kind of EV battery?
Geez, I can't answer that. I can look up these answers for you later, but I think the EV batteries are evolving. I know other countries have better plans for swapping batteries and the way they recycle them, but I don't have a lot of information on that. I'm sorry.
And this is great, Kathy. So again, the reason for using the Q&A is we will have a permanent record of the questions, so we'll be able to provide copies for you. And actually, Larry McHenry further has actually provided a link to OPG's information about projects and hydroelectric development. So
excellent.
that might be a resource for his question about the dams.
Great.
Rashid Khan has asked a question, why BC and Ontario seem to be going in different directions to meet the energy demand, with BC looking at fuel cell technology, mainly for transportation, and Ontario with a more conventional approach.
Well, that was one of the things that came out in the survey, is that all governments, whether it's federal or provincial, need to sing from the same song sheet. But different provinces have different focuses. The work that the Ontario government has done is really, at this point, a fairly high level plan to where they want to go by 2050. I think some of these details are going to emerge over time. I think I mentioned in the presentation that the percent of nuclear, wind, other kinds of generation, they don't even know what that's going to look like by 2050. And I think the more research they do, and as technology improves, we're going to land on what that future supply mix is going to look like. But I think it's too soon to tell, and they're not publishing documents that talk about this kind of detail right now.
The next question from Matthew Aston was just wondering if there was a little bit more information about the 123 respondents to the survey.
In what context, though?
Just who they were, or what kind of experience, I guess, they brought to the table.
Oh, I don't know. Can OSET pull that out?
Well, we certainly can. Basically, what we did was we did a search of our database to determine where we had members working in this field, and we had over 800 members. And basically, the survey was sent to those 800 members, and we had 123 of them contribute the responses.
Great. Yeah, and the only thing I saw was just the responses and the comments. I didn't know who they were coming from.
Correct. So that was the basis and where we drew things from, Matthew.
Okay.
Also, just for people's information, we do tend to make sure that everybody gets a first question before we answer second questions from any individuals. So I'm using that a little bit with going through the moderation. So the next question is from Marcella Villanova. I believe a fully electric vehicle is a disaster for Canada for these reasons. Distribution lines are not sufficient. Storms and power outages are longer. So how would you charge a fully electric vehicle in that scenario? I see colossal traffic congestions when this occurs. A hybrid will be more adaptable, but charging still has to be standardized. And there still needs to be battery research to make it less bulky, but more powerful. So that's a little bit more of a comment rather than a question, but just adding a little bit more to some of the things you presented, Kathy.
Yeah, and I tried to provide some data, that published data on electric vehicles, because there's a lot of misconceptions and negative perceptions that may or not be true. And every time we see a story in the news about electric vehicle catching fire and the people can't get out, or, there's a lot of doom and gloom out there about electric vehicles as well. But I think the government would be happy, by the sounds of it, if the electric vehicles or the hybrid plug-in vehicles were adopted. So I think they're looking at both, which I think is a good idea.
And Craig Eady sort of had a build-on question, which is also related to the storms, and wondering, like, there were some regions in Quebec in one of the last ice storms, for example, that were out of power for more than a month. So would EV owners be expected, for example, to install gas generating system to charge their vehicles in these kinds of outages?
Well,
and how would you travel and be able to charge if there weren't?
Well, you wouldn't be able to unless you had a generator. And I think initially, from what I've heard, when people experience long outages who own electric vehicles, they've actually used if their vehicle's charged, they actually will feed their house temporarily with the storage in their electric vehicle to get them through short power outages. But significant issues are going to arise when you have days and days of no power. I mean, unless you have a generator at your house, I think you're going to be without power and without ability to charge your car. Now, maybe some of these big Tesla charging stations have backups to them. I'm not sure. I don't think so. But yeah, that's a significant issue for sure.
Okay, there was a fairly straightforward question from Rashid Khan. What does the term LDC mean, the acronym?
It means local distribution company. So I work for Electra. They're a local distribution company. So they're not a generator like OPG. They distribute electricity to homes and businesses.
Thank you. There is a question from Colin McLaren. Does it feel like all our eggs are in one basket? It seems like, everything is all on board for EV batteries, but is that a risk if, say, for example, the hydrogen cell or something new arises?
And well, this is, like I said before, this is a work in progress. I mean, the government's trying to look at new nuclear, new transmission. They're looking at energy storage. They're looking at energy efficiencies. They're doing competitive energy procurement. Hoping integrated planning is going to help with this whole scenario, and looking how to reduce the cost to customers. So I think now they're focused on, the EVs and the transportation issues and getting the population grown. Like I told, like the three main drivers for the electrification. But this is early days, and it's really going to evolve over time. They're not. I don't think they're going to put all their eggs in one basket, but I don't think we don't know what we don't know at this point.
Just looking at our time, Kathy, I think we've got time for one more question. I'm going to bring forward the one from Daryl Flyler. What plans are in place to handle the disposal and recycling of EV batteries, because they will not last forever, and this will potentially increase the overall EV costs?
Right. So I don't have a lot of information on that, but there is information out there that I will look up and get back to you on. My personal feeling on this is that there has to be just a robust manner to dispose or recycle these things as there is to build them. So I'll do a little research on that for you There is information out there, but that too is evolving as now these electric vehicles are now been on the road for a few years, and now they're starting to dispose of some of these batteries. So I'll find out some more information on that for you.
So thanks very much for all of the great questions. And as I say, I'm sorry we didn't have time to get to all of them, but the advantage of you having put them in the Q&A section is that we will have a record of them, and we will certainly look for alternative ways to get the answers out, and we'll get all of these to Kathy after the session today. So I'm going to turn it back over to Christopher to wrap us up.
Thank you, Cheryl. And the other interesting thing that I've experienced with power outages, it's hard to pump gas into a car and or pay for it if you don't have electricity either. So it's a combination of things for that. Kathy, thank you again so much for sharing your experience and your expertise, and the expertise of your fellow OSET members this afternoon. It looks like we've had more than 350 participants for most of the presentation. I would also like to acknowledge and thank OSET staff for all their hard work and dedication that allows us to have these informative opportunities. Thank you for helping us celebrate Neat Week in Ontario, and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Thank you very much.